A limiter acts as a very aggressive compressor that reduces the dynamic range of your music and ultimately allows you to increase loudness while avoiding distorted clipping effects. In this video, I'm going to show you how to dial in the settings on FabFilter's Pro-L limiter so that you can create masters that are comparable to songs you hear on the radio. If you've never used a limiter before, no worries. They're rather simple devices. You increase the gain of the signal entering the limiter, which makes the signal louder, and when the signal breaches the limiter's threshold level, the signal gets compressed. The harder you drive the signal into the threshold, the more the signal gets compressed, and the smaller the dynamic range becomes. With a mixed song loaded onto an audio track in your DAW, apply the Pro-L to your master track. Open it up and mouse over the output level section, and then click on this 1:1 ratio symbol, which indicates the unity gain button. This feature automatically sets the output level based on the amount of gain that you've added. The gain and output level become linked in an inverse manner, meaning that if you apply 5 decibels of gain, the output level will be reduced by 5 decibels. This takes loudness bias out of the equation, so instead of automatically thinking that the louder, limited version of your mix sounds better, you can pay attention to the effects of things like mix density and transient behavior. You're going to dial in all your settings with unity gain engaged and then deactivate it when you're finished. Increase the gain until there's about 2 to 3 decibels of gain reduction being applied. You can apply more gain reduction later, but for now, you're doing this so you can hear how the changes you make to the Pro-L settings affect the way in which the plugin is limiting the signal. Open up this advanced tab to see all of the available settings. The Pro-L includes 8 program-dependent limiting algorithms, each of which provide different results. Depending on the effect you're looking for, some of these algorithms will work better than others, but they're all useful in their own way. Some provide transparent results and attempt to avoid coloring your mix, while others deliver punch and flavor. What I like to do is experiment with different algorithms and just use my ears to determine which one sounds the best. There isn't one algorithm to rule them all, and this is where personal taste comes into play, so just go with the algorithm you like and trust your judgment. The Pro-L essentially processes audio in 2 stages. The first stage is the transient stage, and the second stage is the release envelope stage. This Lookahead knob dictates how much time the limiter has to examine the incoming audio in advance and predict the amount of gain reduction needed to meet the output level that you set. If the Lookahead time is short, the limiter is going to preserve transients well and increase apparent loudness, but there's the potential to introduce distortion to your mix. If you use a long Lookahead time, distortion is much less of a risk, but your mix won't sound quite as loud, and you might smooth out some desirable transient material more than you intend to. When setting your Lookahead time, it's a balancing act. You generally want to try to avoid distorting your mix while keeping it loud and punchy. To do this, use your ears and trust your judgment because every song is unique. The attack and release controls affect the release envelope stage of the Pro-L, which responds to the average dynamics of the incoming audio. This attack knob has got to be one of the most misleading controls on the Pro-L because most people are probably going to assume that it acts like the attack control found on a compressor and then become quite confused when it doesn't. The attack time affects how quickly the release stage sets in, not how fast limiting is initially applied to the signal entering the limiter. A short attack time causes the release stage to set in sooner, while a long attack time does the opposite. The release knob controls how long the release stage lasts. Long release times are generally safe and clean in the sense that they won't introduce distortion, but there's a risk of reduced clarity, and you could also end up adding unwanted pumping effects to your mix. Short release times can help increase apparent loudness and presence, but you need to look out for distortion. tweaking these settings is a balancing act, just like when you're dialing in your look-ahead time. Again, use your ears and trust your judgment. Honestly, the default attack and release settings will work quite well in most situations, but if you want that extra bit of control, don't be afraid to play with these knobs. The channel linking section lets you affect whether the Pro-L2 processes the left and right channel of a stereo signal together or independent of one another. For example, when the channels are linked, if there's a peak in the left channel that triggers compression, the limiter will compress the right channel as well, potentially at an inappropriate time, causing a noticeable pumping effect to occur. Now, if you're working with a mix that contains vocals panned over here and guitars panned over here, and there are a bunch of different elements panned across the stereo field, you might benefit from unlinking the two channels. You're going to be able to avoid some unwanted pumping effects, and things will generally sound a little more natural. However, when the channels are unlinked, the left and right side of your mix can start to feel detached from one another, so look out for that. If you're working with a really balanced mix in which the left and right channels of the file you're mastering are quite similar to one another, your best bet is to leave the channels linked together. This avoids unwanted changes to the stereo image of the file. The transient knob controls the amount of channel linking for the transient stage, mainly affecting short peaks, while the release knob controls channel linking for the release stage. The default values of 75% and 100% usually work quite well, but given the material you're processing, you may want to fine-tune these knobs. To avoid clipping when intersample peaks reach your DA converter in your audio interface, you should keep true peak limiting mode engaged. This feature takes into account the level of intersample peaks, so the peaks between samples, when limiting your music. To minimize intersample peak distortion, you can use oversampling. On top of that, you can increase the Pro-L2's look-ahead time. However, a little distortion isn't always a bad thing. By increasing the oversampling rate, your mix is usually going to sound a little snappier and sharper. Personally, I find that I'm often drawn to the sound of oversampling turned off for a lot of EDM tracks. I think it makes the kick and snare sound a little fatter. For singer-songwriter stuff where vocal articulation is really important, I might increase the oversampling rate so that those details are clear. Try experimenting with different oversampling rates. You'll be able to hear a pretty noticeable difference, especially on your percussion. Boosting the oversampling rate really high can be extremely taxing on your computer's CPU, so just keep that in mind as well. Dither is low-level noise that's used to prevent quantization distortion from occurring when you export your music at reduced bit depths. This quantization distortion takes the form of unwanted harmonic content. For example, Ableton makes use of a 32-bit floating point work environment, meaning that if I've produced a song in Ableton and I want to bounce a 24-bit master or 16-bit master, I should potentially apply Dither. Dither is meant to be applied at the last stage of the mastering process, so it makes sense that you're able to apply Dither using the Pro-L2. A limiter is typically the last device in your mastering chain. This noise shaping option allows you to apply noise in a way that's less noticeable to the human ear, but still effective when it comes to preventing quantization distortion. Each option applies noise in a slightly different way, with the weighted option theoretically resulting in the lowest audible noise at a sample rate of 44.1. Dither will quite often have little to no effect on your music if it's been mastered really loud and contains little dynamics. This can mask quantization distortion, making it inaudible. If the noise floor of your music is really high as a result of the gear you recorded with, Dither will just boost the noise floor further, providing no real benefit. You also don't need to apply Dither when bouncing an AAC or MP3 file because these formats don't make use of a fixed bit depth. So when does it make sense to apply Dither? Well, if you're working with a dynamic song and you can hear quantization distortion when you bounce the track, apply Dither and then bounce the song again. If you can't hear the effects of quantization distortion, don't worry about applying Dither. Having said this, keep in mind that 16-bit files are more susceptible to noticeable quantization distortion than 24-bit files. To deal with this, more noise is applied when you select a lower bit depth from the Pro-L2's Dither menu. At this point, you can readjust the amount of gain being applied to your mix. You may want to lay off the limiting a bit or limit the mix a little harder. Pay attention to how the transients of your mix are responding to these gain changes. Generally, you want to limit your mix to a point where things sound cohesive and glued together while avoiding sucking the life out of your drums. turn down the level of your audio interface a bit so you don't destroy your ears, and then deactivate Unity Gain. You're almost ready to export your song, but the destination format is now something you need to take into consideration. Are you uploading this mix to streaming services, or are you going to burn multiple songs onto a CD? The answer to that question affects the LUFS level you should aim for using the Pro-L 2, along with the output level you should set. These are the last two things you need to deal with before bouncing your track. I've linked to a tutorial I made about LUFS levels down below that will teach you how to monitor and adjust LUFS levels using the Pro-L 2, which target LUFS levels to aim for, and what level to set your output. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you want to learn how to produce better music fast, start now by subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss out on tips, tutorials, and gear roundups. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Break.